Yes, everybody, welcome back to TarHeelIllustrated.com, or of course, if you are watching on our YouTube channel, that's Tar Heel Illustrated. I'm THI staff writer Jacob Turner, joining me as he always does for another episode of the THI podcast, our very own publisher, Andrew Jones. And AJ, we're here to talk about what Carolina has lost in the portal and kind of putting a question out there to people. And this is what we're going to discuss in this podcast of what did they really lose in the portal? I know you've broke down some numbers on some of the guys that they have lost so far. We are recording this on Wednesday afternoon. As of right now, the Tar Heels have lost 6 guys: Tyler Nickel, Justin McCoy, Puff Johnson, Dontrez Styles, Will Shaver, and Caleb Love, which broke earlier this week on Monday, him being the latest one to leave. And AJ, I think it's an interesting conversation to have because there's a lot of panic out there from fans. There's a lot of people that are thinking that this mass exodus and how is Carolina going to replace these guys? Who are they going to bring in? And how are they going to replace just the sheer amount of numbers that they need to bring in? And while I do think they obviously have to bring in numbers, I think there's a little bit different of a way you can kind of look at it and analyze it and really see what they really lost, similar to what we did earlier this year with the football team with the amount of transfers they had as well. So AJ, let's talk about those 6 guys in particular. Again, I know you've broken down some stats, so I'll just pose the question to you, the same question that this podcast is titled as: what did Carolina really lose in the portal so far?
Yeah, on the surface, when 6 guys hit the portal, the perception would be that it's a train wreck.
Like a mass exodus.
The ship's going down and guys are grabbing onto furniture as the Titanic is submerged in very cold water.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not going to say that that's not true, because anytime you lose 6 players into the portal off a team that has 13 scholarships and 2 guys graduated and move on or used up their eligibility and moved on, that's 8 of the 13 departing. It's a bad look, and it's going to raise a lot of eyebrows. And I think that a lot of the narratives that are out there are at least laced with a little bit of truth. You don't lose 6 guys if everything's wonderful.
Yeah, that's true.
You don't lose 6 guys if it's harmony every time everybody steps inside that locker room, and you don't lose 6 guys if everybody's all on the right track from a basketball standpoint. So, and you don't lose 6 guys if the coach is really, really happy with his roster. So there are a lot of things at play here about why 6 guys have moved on. And I think you can break it down into 3 groups to really get a better understanding of this. One is Will Shaver. Will wasn't going to produce much anyway. When I factored in these averages that I'm going to read out here in a minute, I did not include him simply because he only played 3 games. He got hurt in mid-December. In fact, we found out, I think the first game he missed, he was injured, was the Jumpman Classic Invitational against Michigan, and that's why I got that picture of him on crutches. Yeah. But he only played 3 games up to that point, so he wasn't really going to factor into anything. Him coming to Carolina was going to be a long, slow process.
Yeah, he was a process guy for sure.
Yeah, now it's no longer a process at Carolina. And then I'm going to exclude Caleb, because I think Caleb departing is different, especially because he was the 6th of the 6 guys. And the narrative had already been established that it's a sinking ship and the rats are fleeing, basically. That's what people are saying out there. So I'm going to focus on Puff Johnson, Tyler Nickel, Dontrez Styles, Justin McCoy. And you asked, what did they really lose? Well, let me throw the numbers at you, and then we'll kind of go from there, Jake.
Yeah.
What I did was I crunched up their numbers, and I divided their aggregate of their numbers by 33, by 33 times 4. So each guy could have played 33 games. A couple guys missed some games because of injury, not much. But the whole point is you want to know, what did they contribute throughout the whole season? It's not what is their average per the games they played, it's the team played. So if the 4 of them combined averaged 5.5 minutes a game, 1.5 points, 0.87 rebounds. They were 64 for 165 from the field, which is 38.8%. And they were 24 for 88 from 3, which is 27.3%. So I asked the question to everybody watching and listening: what did they lose? And this is not meant to be disrespectful, but let's face it, Dontrez Styles had 2 years in the program and it wasn't working. It wasn't working. And we knew well before the season ended that he was going to move on. Okay. Justin McCoy he played 59 minutes this year. Mm-hmm. Wasn't going to play anymore next year. It was time for him to move on. Tyler Nickel did catch us by surprise. We didn't expect him to leave. So when that broke, I was out getting my steps and I had to rush home.
Sounds
we were
right.
a little bit caught off guard there. But Tyler struggled. He struggled this year. He didn't score a field goal after the Pittsburgh game on February 1st. Mm-hmm. Now, a lot of that is not entirely his fault. I don't think that Hubert used him maybe in a way that he could or should have used him. Or maybe he knew a lot more about what Tyler can't do than we knew. We have a limited window of evidence to look at, and that's him in games. Hubert had every day for 8 months. So maybe he knows something that a lot of us just haven't had the opportunity to see. Now, I do think Puff is a loss because Puff would be a really good reserve. He could be a really good reserve on a really good team.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that. But Puff wants to be a starter, and he was told that they were going to recruit over him in the portal. And I think if you're going into your 4th year at Carolina in the current climate of college sports and you're going to get recruited over from the portal for a guy that hasn't invested in the program, it kind of makes sense that Puff would move on and feel maybe a little bit slighted as well. Mm-hmm. So he's probably a 7th man on a really good team. And you got to have a 7th man. And as Dina says, he's a go-go gadget guy. He's a pretty good rebounder. He finds loose balls. He's active. But he had a poor year shooting. He was wildly inconsistent. He'd be pretty good one game, and then an error ball, defensive lapses, and turnovers in another game. After 3 years, where was he as a player? I think what you see is what you get, and the program probably – I don't think that this was a program decision. I think this was sort of something that they all agreed on in the end, and Puff was looking for something a little bit different. And I don't believe that Hubert was tugging hard at his pant leg to stay when he moved on. Now, I think Hubert cares deeply about Puff, and I think that he would love to have a guy like that on the roster, but that he's not on the roster, it's not like he can't go find another guy like Puff Johnson out there, and maybe someone who could do something maybe better at a couple of things that actually elevates you in certain areas. So I like Puff personally. You know that, Jacob. I like the family. I wish he'd be around for another year because I enjoy covering him, but he has an opportunity to go find something better for him. And Carolina now has an opportunity to find someone that maybe fits a little bit more in Hubert's vision, which is another podcast we're going to do here in time. But I don't think they lost a whole lot. And we'll talk about the Caleb aspect in a second.
Yeah, no, I agree. I don't necessarily think when you look at this list that they lost too much. I think you kind of talked to, I think in my opinion, the biggest loss, I don't know if you know biggest loss is the right word, but you talked about Nickel. I really think Nickel could have offered something. I really do. I think he's a guy that with his scoring prowess in high school, all-time leading scorer in Virginia high school history. I mean, he absolutely tore up the late night game. And I think we saw glimpses during that of and I know it's preseason, doesn't mean much, but okay, there's something here. This guy can shoot. He's confident. He seems like a good player. And again, just never really was given the opportunity. We talked about it early. I don't know if we ever talked about it on a podcast, but I remember talking about some Carolina fans, the Puff factor, because I don't know if you remember this, but there was a stretch in the season where Nance was the scapegoat. Everything was Nance's fault. The reason the team sucked was because Pete Nance wasn't producing. And there was this is exactly what Carolina fans were saying. And there was this big calling card from a majority of Carolina fans of well, Puff should be starting. And you talked about it earlier. I don't think we saw enough consistency from Puff when he was in the game to warrant him starting. But AJ, this is what I responded to a lot of Carolina fans with is, you have to be available to play, and Puff's, unfortunately for him in his 3 years at Carolina, was just full of injuries. He wasn't available a lot. You know what I mean? And that was probably the biggest issue that he had as well. So I don't necessarily, like you kind of said, I don't really count Justin McCoy because I think he was leaving anyway. And late in the season, I mean, he wasn't going into games unless kind of the walk-ons were going in. That's kind of where his position with the team was. So I don't really consider him a big loss. Again, Will Shaver kind of felt like he was never there in the first place because he only played 3 games, got hurt, came in early last year, didn't play. So again, are you really losing anything in him? No. Dontrez Styles, wish it would have worked out. But again, you have to kind of in some ways, and I think this is where a lot of Carolina fans are kind of struggling with some of these guys leaving because and I completely understand it because we've talked about it. There's a large majority of people are like, well, some of these guys were just never really given the opportunity. But we also have to sit back and say, okay, that might be the case. But we also have to understand, like you mentioned, that Hubert saw them every day. The coaching staff saw them every day. We have to give them some kind of benefit of the doubt that Hubert just wasn't putting those guys in because he didn't feel like it. You have to kind of trust that there was something going behind the scenes with Styles that wasn't warranting him playing.
But I've reported it. I've reported it on our board
exactly
countless number of times. And go back to the interview that I did with him after the Boston College game in Greensboro. You could find it on our YouTube channel, Tar Heel Illustrated.
Yeah.
I talked to him about some of the issues about not playing, but one of the things, and he didn't swat it away. He acknowledged it, was that he struggled with the offense. He sometimes wasn't in the right place. And he gets into the game at Florida State after having 6 DNPs in 7 games. Suddenly Hubert throws him out there in the first half. It surprised him.
Yeah.
And twice Pete had to tell him to get to the other side. I was sitting on the baseline there in Tallahassee, and you could see Pete's like, come on, you're in the wrong place. And I asked Dontrez about that after the BC game, and he started smiling and acknowledged, yes, that was a problem. He didn't run from it. So I think with Dontrez, you have a guy that when he walks out of the tunnel for shoot around, opposing fans will be like, oh, well, that's a guy to look out for.
Yeah.
Because he looks the part. He's really athletic. I do think there are things that he could probably bring to the table to help the team. But I think in the end, Hubert, and we'll talk about this again when we do the next podcast about reshaping the team into his image, his vision. He doesn't want to have multiple guys on the floor that might be specialists in areas that have nothing to do with having the ball in their hands.
Yeah.
You look at Florida Atlantic, you got to guard 1 through 5. Okay. Look at a lot of these teams look at Miami, you got to guard 1 through 5. So Hubert wants that. And Styles wasn't going to be a guy that would have to be guarded a lot because he doesn't have great ball skills. He hit the 3 against Baylor at the beginning of overtime. Everybody's locked onto that. But you know what? That happened a year ago. And everyone's locking on to one not even a sequence, just a fleeting moment a year ago about, okay, well, he can do that. But that was a year ago. What were the moments this year? A dunk against the Citadel in mop-up? And I'm not being demeaning to the young man. I think that there are a lot of things he could bring to the table, and I do think he can go help somebody else. But 2 years in, and he played half the minutes he did a year ago. As much criticism as Hubert has gotten here in the last 6 weeks, and I think a lot of it is justified, he's not a moron. He knows he doesn't want to lose games. So if there were things that Dontrez could do on a consistent basis, he would have been on the floor every night. Puff was on the floor every night, but he just didn't perform every night. So, and I do think the Puff factor is something that I think it surprised a lot of people because they figured, well, his brother went there and they had such a good experience there, and Puff just wants to be a part of the Carolina family, which is why I didn't think he was going to leave. He and Nickel were the ones that surprised me. And as for your comments about Nickel, by the way, there's one guy on this team that blocked 2 shots in transition this year, right at the rim. That was Tyler Nickel. He did it against Ohio State in Madison Square Garden and brought that building to its feet when he did it. He has some screw you in his game.
Yeah, he does.
He's a chest pounder. He's a screamer, but all that went away. Like we saw that in November and December.
Oh yeah, it just evaporated away.
And by the time February hit, he was an emotionless player. The facial expression was almost like, man, I'd rather be anywhere else. So I guess in hindsight, maybe it's not that surprising, but I think that's what happened with a lot of guys on the bench. I just think that, I don't want to say that they were squashed, but I think their spirit diminished over the course of time. And that's something that the head coach needs to figure out about how to manage a roster, how to manage guys and find the minutes here and there to keep them happy. But as we said in another podcast, or maybe David and I did it in one of ours, that I believe, and we were talking about it on the board, I think last night, after the starting 5, there was a drop off. In part, there was a drop off because we never really got a lot of opportunity to see the other guys other than Puff, and Puff was incredibly inconsistent. So
Mhm.
I think nickel can go a lot of places and be a really good player. I think Puff can help a lot of teams. I think Dontrez can be very effective, perhaps at a lower level, someplace like East Carolina, or maybe he ends up at NC State. If
Yeah.
he ends up at NC State, which would be wild, but it wouldn't be the first guy to play for both State and Carolina. People might remember the great Bones McKinney from back in the day. If you don't, look it up and learn something, because he also has a Wake Forest connection because he was their coach.
Mhm.
So that would be unique. It would be a sign of the times. And it would be pretty cool to see him get 25 minutes against Carolina to see what kind of player he really is.
Yeah.
Because in the end, we're not at practice. We get to go to football practice. We get one basketball practice a year. So we don't have as much to go by with basketball from a practice standpoint as we do football. So it would be really neat to see all these guys get a lot of minutes wherever they go, so we can really see what kinds of players they are.
Yeah, no doubt about it. We'll talk about Caleb real quick. Caleb, love to
Yeah.
before we wrap this one up, because Caleb's I can't. It's hard for me to explain how I feel about Caleb, because to me I tweeted it out yesterday, but to me he's the most enigmatic player I've ever experienced in my lifetime watching Carolina basketball. And what I mean by that is he divides opinion because of what he did in last year's run, and again, I've said this on social media and on podcasts, that should never be taken away, and it will never be taken away. 50 years from now, Carolina fans who lived through that run will, when they hear the name Caleb Love, will remember the shot over Mark Williams. It's just a fact. It doesn't matter if you hate him or love him now. He will go down in Carolina history. I think there will be a positive kind of memory of him when it comes down to it as time kind of moves on. But for me, Caleb was a guy who consistency was always his issue at Carolina. I mean, I've got his stats pulled up right here, AJ. He shot 29.9% from three-point land this year. That's not good enough for a guy whose skill sets are as high as he is. Shot 36% last year and 26.6% from three during his freshman year. So 2 of the 3 years he was here, shot in the 20% from three-point land. Field goal percentage, shot 37.8 from the floor last year, 37.1 the previous year, 31.6 his freshman year. So a guy that never shot over 40% from field goal throughout a season. Played a ton of minutes as well. Obviously, his average went up as his years went on, went from averaging 15.9 last year to 16.7. It's not a huge jump, and his rebound numbers went up slightly from last year, and his assist numbers actually went down just a little bit as well. But my biggest criticism of Caleb was always, we used to kind of, we jokingly, people in the media have used the term the Caleb Love experience. And to me, that's kind of a perfect microcosm of kind of summary of him, because he's a guy that could single-handedly kind of win you a game, and then a minute later do something, make a bad play that could potentially lose you the game. And it could be back-to-back instances like that. So for me, Caleb's consistency in the leash he was given, I can't think of a single player in Carolina basketball history, at least in my lifetime, that was given a longer leash than Caleb Love was by his head coach. Now, Hubert has a little bit different philosophy. I don't necessarily think Dean Smith or Roy Williams would ever give any player the amount of length in their leash that Caleb had. I mean, Caleb was a guy that could essentially do kind of whatever he wanted to, for lack of a better word, and still stay in the game, which we've talked about at length. And I think that's a criticism of how he was managed. I don't think that's necessarily his fault. I think he could have been managed better. But when I look at Caleb, I look at a guy whose high end was phenomenal, AJ, and his low end was pretty poor. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at his 3 years, most of the time he was kind of in here. He wasn't up here all the time. He wasn't down here all the time. Most of the time he was just kind of floating somewhere down here. And I think in losing him because of the way Carolina played, and who knows how they'll play this year, because Hubert does need to make adjustments. We've talked about that at length. I don't think he fits what Hubert was trying to do. I think that's abundantly clear by what we've heard behind the scenes and by the fact that him transferring. So I do think you can go out in the portal and get somebody that maybe doesn't have the high-end talent that Caleb has, but he has more consistency and is maybe just a better overall player for 33, 38 games a season than Caleb was. So he's an interesting one to talk about, because I do see both sides of it. But when I look at Caleb, I think inconsistent, and that's where I go with it. And again, I'm not trying to slander him or hate on him or anything like that.
No, he knows.
It's just when you look at his stats, I just think that's what you got with Caleb. And again, I think he can be upgraded. I think you can bring maybe a couple guys in that fit what you're trying to do better than Caleb Love did, for lack of a better word.
Jacob, he knows. I've talked to him about it.
Yeah, I mean, I've talked to him about it as well at times. Yeah,
I've talked to him about it multiple times. He knows. He's very aware of it, and that's something that gnaws at him. and he'll carry that the next place he goes, because whatever, he may not have pressure from the outside world wherever he goes, depending on where he goes, but he's going to have a lot of internal pressure.
Yeah, no
so
doubt.
He's going to have to deal with that. He's going to have to deal with that because he's got 2 more years, because he can use the COVID year, because he was a freshman during COVID. I think one of the issues with Caleb, and one of the things that I think Hubert's trying to avoid moving forward, and you really can see it by who came back, but you couldn't ever, when you have a guy who's your leading scorer and you can't pencil him in for anything, for a game, that's a problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what, here you are at the end of his junior year, a guy that's played, like you said, he's been given the longest leash of any guy I've covered. Now, I think they've had guys that have been bigger issues. I don't think Caleb is a bad guy per se, right?
No,
I think Joe. I watched Joe Forte destroy a locker room. I watched it. I walked in that locker room and saw the islands everybody was on there, right?
Yeah.
I think the single greatest coaching job Roy Williams ever had in his career was getting Rashad McCants on the same page with everybody else for the last couple of months, 2005, and they got a national title out of it. Roy had to get Rashad into a sort of a little Rashad box where he stayed there and didn't disrupt, and they were able to get a national title out of it, okay? Caleb, I think, is different. I don't think Caleb's Joe Forte. I think Forte was a better player.
In the locker room, no.
Forte could be penciled in for the production. It's just all the other stuff that were issues at the time. Rashad was a little more inconsistent, but his high end was insane. He was a great shooter, and he was also a screw you guy that got in the heads of other teams. I think Caleb got in the heads of teams last year. I don't think he got in the heads of teams this year. I think a lot of his barking when he's 3 for 15 ended up working against him. I think it worked for him for a while and ended up working against him, which is why I think the best move for him and the best move for Carolina was that he move on. I think he maxed out in Chapel Hill. I think he exhausted everything there, and it was time to move on and do something else. I get it. I think he could be an awesome player somewhere else. And I would think that every school that needs a 2 guard should talk to him, because whatever issues he had in Chapel Hill doesn't mean that all of them carried to the next place. Although in the end, Caleb has to fix Caleb, because the ebb and flow of his game, which are steep, that he's going to have to figure out a way to curtail that, because maybe he goes somewhere where they also give him a leash. Maybe he chooses somewhere where he knows he's going to get a bunch of shots and the same stuff happens again. Or maybe he decides to go somewhere where they don't have the same loyalty toward him, and they're going to sit him when they need to sit him. And maybe that helps his game, and he kind of finds that next gear in his game. I hope he does that. But it wasn't going to work at Chapel Hill anymore. It was over. There was the discussions about how maybe it could work, but in the end, he just had to move on. They had to move on. So what have they lost in the portal? Shaver never played. It was time for Caleb to go. Puff was wildly inconsistent and wanted to start, and he was told they're going to recruit over him. Styles, what you see is what you get. McCoy wasn't really going to be a factor. I think the one wild card is Nickel. I agree with you on that. I wish for Carolina basketball's sake, and there are a lot of people I know that are big Carolina basketball fans, so for their sake, I would love to have seen Tyler Nichols stick it out for one more year and see what kind of player he could become, because he is a fiery guy, and I think Carolina basketball needs some fire. Oh, yeah. And by the way, let me go back for a moment here. I'm zigzagging all over the place, but my comment about Caleb, you couldn't pencil him in. You could pencil in stuff from RJ. One thing you could pencil in is motor. The motor's there. The motor never wavers, whether they're up 20 or down 20. I think with Armando, you can pencil in stuff too. Don't look at the stat sheet the last month and a half of the season. A lot of that was a byproduct of everything else not working, no adjustments being made offensively, and him getting double and triple teamed. And he would be double teamed, and a guard would drop down to affect the handle. He was a totally different offensive player the last 6 weeks of the season than previously. So I think in a well-built situation, you'll be able to pencil in 16 and 13 from Armando every night next year. So Caleb, you couldn't pencil anything in. And after 3 years, take as many shots as he does. it becomes a problem and they had to move on from it. So I don't think they've lost a whole lot in the portal, especially if they're able to replenish. Mac Brown, people were going crazy saying, oh my God, the rats are leaving the sinking ship again. They love that term, right? Yeah. On social media, because he lost a couple of starters and he lost some guys that have some potential, but he replenished. And I will tell you guys right now, the Carolina football fans that might be paying attention, they got better through the portal.
Agreed.
What went out and what came in, Carolina got better. So Hubert has the same opportunity here with the basketball program. So let's see what he does. He's got one in with Paxton Wojcik as the time that we're recording this. More stuff may happen soon.
Probably will.
And in the next pod that we're going to do, we're going to discuss it, what he's going to do and how this will determine his future, to be honest with you.
Yeah, no doubt. And I'm looking forward to talking in that podcast because again, a lot of people have kind of labeled criticism of, it wasn't his team. Well, it's going to be his team now. And again, I'll save that for another podcast because it's going to be
that's a good tease. We usually don't tease other pods.
No, 100%.
We're doing a good job teasing the next pod, Jacob.
Yeah, you gotta just
kudos to us.
Throw a little piece of cheese, man. We're talking about rats a lot in here, so might as well throw another rat.
Yeah. See, we're not consistent either. We have a little Caleb Love in us. We're not consistent. We don't tease our other podcasts. We don't promote our site that much. We should promote our sponsors, My Perfect Franchise. Yep. If you're sick of your career and you hate your boss, give Andy Ludicky a call. Jacob will put the thing in the bottom here. Yep. And guys, if you can't sleep at night or if your shoulder hurts, something like that, Rogue Shop. Jacob will put that in there too. And by the way, TarHeelIllustrated.com, $8.33 a month. You can be an insider too. There we go. We did it all right there.
That's good stuff right there, AJ. I'm about to point.
That's like being a stat sheet stuffer in this one podcast.
Yeah, that's. I would point to the passer. That's three. That's three. You made 3 buckets right there. I guess I kind of assisted you a little bit. I kind of assisted you a little bit, I guess. So yeah, well, a little assist to each other, I guess. So AJ, good stuff.
We go like this. There we go.
Yeah. That's great plugs right there, AJ. Shout out to our sponsors, My Perfect Franchise, Rogue Shop, and again, like you said, $8.33 a month. Be a Carolina Insider too, and you could have heard tidbits and information about when guys were leaving a week, 2 weeks before it even broke in the first place. That's why
you would have known about Shaver and Styles in mid-February, early February.
Yep. That's why you sign up for our premium message boards. That's the benefit of doing that. And obviously the more people that sign up, the more stuff we can do not only on the website, on the YouTube channel as well. So again, click those links below, go head on over to all those websites, including ours, and sign up. $8.33 a month. You can be a Carolina Insider too. I've been Jacob Turner. He's been Andrew Jones. Another episode of the THI podcast. Appreciate y'all watching. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. Hit that notification bell too, because we are uploading a ton of videos this time of year, and we'll be continue to do so throughout the off season. I appreciate y'all watching. We'll see you in the next one. Thanks.